Tennis is one of the few sports where the science is this clear. Researchers tracked more than 8,500 people over 25 years and found that tennis players lived an average of 9.7 years longer than people who did not play sport at all. Not a little longer, nearly a decade longer. That is more than swimming, more than cycling, more than jogging. The sport literally extends your life. So why are most recreational players off the court before they hit 65? That is the question this video is actually about. Because the data says tennis should be keeping you alive. And yet most players quietly disappear from the game long before the sport is done with them. No dramatic injury, no formal goodbye. Just one day they realize they have not played in 8 months, and somehow the motivation to fix that never quite shows up. Most players never find out what actually went wrong. They blame their knee, they blame their schedule, they blame getting older. And all of those things might be partially true. But underneath all of it, there are 3 structural habits that separate the players still competing at 85 from the ones who were quietly gone by 62. And none of them are what most people assume. Here is what actually ends senior tennis careers. It is almost never one moment. It is a slow erosion that happens in 3 overlapping stages. First, the body stops recovering from singles fast enough. Sessions start getting skipped. Then the opponents start feeling wrong, too fast, too young, too slow, too punishing. And there is frustration without a name attached to it. Then the regular game collapses. The circle gets smaller. And isolation sets in so gradually that most players do not even recognize it as isolation. They just know they are not playing anymore. The exit is quiet, and it does not have to happen. The first habit sounds obvious until you understand why most players resist it for years longer than they should. Singles has an expiration date for most bodies. Doubles does not. This is not about fitness level or competitive spirit. It is about geometry and physics. In singles, one player must cover all 27 feet of court alone. Every rally, every point, every match. In doubles, 2 players share 36 feet, roughly 18 feet each. That difference does not just feel smaller. It compounds over thousands of hours of play into a completely different load on the knees, hips, ankles, and lower back. When analysts examined professional tour data on match retirements due to injury, the numbers were striking. Singles players were injured at roughly 4 times the rate of doubles players, a gap the medical literature consistently confirms across multiple studies. The format itself is doing serious damage to senior bodies that singles quietly accelerates and doubles largely prevents. And yet most players resist the switch. Because singles feels like real tennis. Doubles feels like a consolation prize. Like you are admitting something. Like you are retreating from the version of the sport you actually love. That framing is exactly backwards. Switching to doubles is not surrender. It is a structural adjustment that makes the next 20 years of tennis possible. The players still on court at 75, 80, 85, look at what they are playing. Almost universally, it is doubles. Not because they gave up on singles. Because they figured out that doubles is the format that lets you stay in the game for the rest of your life, and singles is the format that slowly convinces your body the game is over. There is something else doubles gives you that singles cannot. The tactical dimension shifts entirely. Instead of running yourself into the ground, covering the full court, you are making decisions, reading the net player, picking angles, communicating with a partner, thinking 2 shots ahead. The mental engagement stays high while the physical punishment drops. For a player in their 60s or 70s, that trait is not a downgrade. It is a different and often more interesting game. Players who make the switch early enough frequently report that doubles extended not just how long they played, but how much they enjoyed it. The quit does not come from weakness. It comes from loyalty to the wrong format. But switching to doubles only solves half the problem. Because doubles only works if you have the right people to play with. And for most senior players, finding those people is where the second career-ending mistake, quietly happens. The loneliest place in recreational tennis is a court where you do not belong. Mismatched opponents are silent career enders. They rarely break you in one match. They just make you not want to come back. Play against people who are too young and too fast, and every session becomes a reminder of what you used to be. Play against people too slow or too weak, and the game loses its meaning. Neither scenario builds the kind of anticipation that gets you back on the court next Tuesday. The data on this is harder to ignore than most club players realize. Social isolation affects roughly 25% of people 65 and older, and that isolation is associated with a 50% increased risk of dementia, along with elevated risk of premature death, heart disease, and stroke. These are not soft lifestyle concerns. They are health outcomes, and they are directly connected to whether a senior player has a consistent, well-matched, socially engaging tennis circle or does not. Research into Masters tennis players found that social bonding was a significant and positive predictor of successful aging, not competitive record, not physical output. Social bonding, stronger personal investment in tennis, treating it as central to one's identity, not just a hobby, was also linked to healthier aging orientations. The players who stayed embedded in a real tennis community, one that fit their age and level, were the ones aging best. Physically, cognitively, emotionally, this is not a soft argument for being friendly at the club. This is a court longevity strategy with measurable health backing. The players who quietly disappeared from the sport did not just lose fitness. Many of them lost their circle first. They ended up isolated by default, playing whoever showed up, which was usually the wrong people, and the court stopped feeling like somewhere they belonged. Finding age-matched, level-matched opponents is not about lowering your standards. It is about building the conditions that make you want to keep playing. Week after week, year after year, decade after decade. The practical answer for most senior players is closer than they think. Local club leagues with age-graded divisions, ITF Ulm, EF World. Tennis Masters Tour events. For players 50 and over. Regional, senior circuits that run round-robin formats guaranteeing multiple matches. These structures exist specifically to solve the isolation and mismatch problem. The players who find them and plug into them tend to keep playing. The ones who rely on whoever happens to show up at the public court on a Saturday morning tend not to. But even the right format and the right community cannot compensate for the third mistake. And this one is the most underestimated of the three. Most senior players treat recovery as what happens between sessions. The ones still playing at 85 treat it as a session in itself. This distinction sounds simple. The gap it creates over years of play is enormous. Here is what actually happens to the body past 50 that most recreational players either do not know or quietly refuse to accept. Melatonin production decreases, fluid balance shifts, muscle repair slows down measurably. The physiological changes that accompany aging do not just mean the body hurts more after a hard match. They mean the body needs more deliberate, intentional recovery input just to maintain the baseline that younger players absorb automatically. Researchers are clear that for athletes over 50, recovery is not a passive byproduct of not playing. It is the cornerstone of sustainable performance. The quality of recovery determines whether training and match play translate into long-term gains or into chronic fatigue that slowly convinces the body it is done. Sleep is the most under-discussed variable in senior tennis performance. Adults over 50 still require 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. But the distribution of sleep stages changes with age, which means the recovery that sleep provides becomes less efficient even when the hours are there. Chronic insomnia is common in people over 60, and chronic sleep deprivation does not just make you tired. It affects cognition, elevates risk of depression, raises blood pressure, and compounds every other physical vulnerability a senior player is already managing. Research on collegiate tennis players found that longer sleep times directly improved serve accuracy. If sleep quality has measurable performance effects at the collegiate level, it becomes an even more decisive variable as the body ages and its margin for recovery shrinks. What a deliberate recovery day actually looks like for a senior player is not complicated. It is not an ice bath or a sports science protocol. It is 20 minutes of gentle movement to keep the joints from stiffening. It is hydration managed across the full day rather than just during the match. It is a meal with enough protein to give the muscles something to work with overnight. And it is a consistent sleep window. The same time down, the same time up. Because sleep quality in older adults is heavily tied to routine. None of this is difficult. Most senior players simply never think of it as part of their tennis program. The ones who do stay on court, the ones who do not gradually accumulate a debt the body eventually refuses to keep extending. The players who are still competing past 80 are not more talented than the ones who stopped at 62. They are not genetically blessed in some unusual way. They are more honest about what their body needs between sessions and more deliberate about providing it. They take rest days seriously. They manage load across the week instead of stacking matches and practice sessions until something gives. They treat sleep as a performance tool, not as a byproduct of exhaustion. Recovery is not optional maintenance for senior recreational players. It is the variable that separates the ones who stay from the ones who quietly stop. Now tie all three of these together, because the connection between them matters. These habits are not about playing less tennis. They are about playing more tennis for longer. The entire architecture of a long tennis career, one that actually runs into your 70s, 80s, beyond, rests on three decisions that most recreational players never deliberately make. Change the format. Doubles removes the physical load that ends senior bodies prematurely. It is not a concession. It is the structural choice that keeps the game available. Find your people. Age-matched, level-matched, socially connected play is not a preference. It is the environment that sustains motivation, prevents isolation, and builds the kind of community the research shows is directly tied to healthy aging. Treat recovery as training, not as downtime, not as a passive gap between real sessions, as a deliberate, managed part of the game itself. Unlike contact sports that slowly dismantle the body, tennis is genuinely a sport that can be enjoyed for a lifetime. The physical dividends it pays out keep growing the longer you stay in the game. But staying in the game is not automatic. The players who are still on court in their 80s made deliberate structural choices that most of their peers never stopped to examine. The door does not close at 60 unless you let it. And now you know exactly what opens it back up. Which of these three habits do you think gets ignored most at your club? Is it the format, the opponent mismatch, or the recovery piece that you see people overlooking? Drop it in the comments, and if you know someone who is still competing well into their 80s, tell me what you think their actual secret is. Because that player already figured out something most of us are still learning.